Alright, y'all, so today I want to do a very quick video of my review of Batman Earth 1, this comic book run, which was written by Jeff Johns, art mostly done by Gary Frank, and it was part of the Earth 1 imprint by DC. Had 3 volumes of graphic novels, and that's all the series ever presented. So, my quick review and thoughts on it. So, Batman Earth 1, I really didn't know what to expect because Batman in general as a character in comic books and films and other mediums has had so much reinvention put onto him. There's been so many different takes on Batman and so many different stories and deconstructions of the character over the years, right? And it's kind of, I don't know, when you write a Batman story, I think that inherently becomes daunting because there's just so much that's already been done with Batman, right? And I'm sure this was obviously presented as a challenge to Jeff Johns, who wrote this comic. Earth 1 as an imprint by DC, right, came out in the early 2010s, really just fizzled out after that. But the whole idea of it was something like the Ultimate Marvel Universe, right, where it was gonna present fresh, new, modern takes on these classic characters for a new audience to come in and enjoy comics and all these characters all new again, right? And for people that know these characters and want to see how what's different, right? And that's usually how, especially an art form and characters and comics progress, when people want to try out new things and try out different takes and stuff. My overall initial impression of Batman Earth 1 is it's really good. I think Jeff Johns did a very solid and interesting version of Batman that's pretty different from the main Batman mythology, but also the core of the character is absolutely still there. This is absolutely still Batman at the end of the day, but it's radically different. I wouldn't say it's as crazy as something like Absolute Batman though. That book completely flips the script on some things known about Batman. But this book, is pretty crazy. Some of the distinct differences here are Alfred here wasn't a butler born into the with the Wayne family. He's a military security guard that worked with Thomas Wayne, and kind of just begrudgingly takes upon the role as the caregiver and guardian of Bruce. As obviously a very different take on Alfred. I personally liked it. I think that their relationship, especially how they acted throughout the volume, it's very it's like a father and a son, antagonistic to a degree because both are fighting for what they think the other person needs to do, but also both of them love each other at the end of the day. And I really at first I was pretty this version of Alfred at first I wasn't hugely a fan of, but as the series went along I really warmed up to him and I thought he was a good character. There's also some other major differences, and I'll just kind of break it down in my review of each volume one by one. The first volume of this series focuses on Batman's beginnings, right? Batman is just starting out, and it's clear in the first few panels of this comic, this is not the experienced Batman that we've known in most of the DC continuity. He fails, his gadgets fail, he falls and busts his ass sometimes. Definitely a new Batman onto the scene, right? And his whole motivations, too, in this first volume are very different. At first, he really just wants to find Cobblepot, the Penguin, who in this continuity is actually the mayor of Gotham. And he believes that, this person was involved with his parents' murders, and he dons his whole persona to basically get revenge. And, this whole story involves fighting out other things. We also see Detective Gordon and Bullock, who in this version, Bullock is a very optimistic guy. He's actually the one to push Gordon in his first volume to actually do some police work and do right by the city, because in this version, since Cobblepot's the mayor, there's so much corruption in the police department, no one can really do anything about crime. Everyone has to turn a blind eye, right? There's also this character called the Birthday Boy, which is a mass serial killer that the Penguin uses to basically quell his opponents. He also has an obsession with little girls and killing them because they remind him of a victim that he killed that was a little girl a long time ago. One of the creepiest Batman villains, by the way, a really sadistic and creepy villain to ever seen in a Batman story. Regardless, the book kind of ends with Batman learning more about himself, becoming better, stopping the birthday boy, and eventually, Gordon and Bullock rising up to actually stop and save their daughter, Barbara, who gets kind of kidnapped, so to speak, in this whole situation. At the end of the book, too, Cobblepot, Batman confronts him. Cobblepot tells him that he had nothing to do with his parents' murders. He put out a hit on them, but he didn't actually kill them. It was like a random thug in the street. And then Alfred comes in, like he finds out his true identity too, and then Alfred comes in and just shoots him out the window. So a very dramatic and crazy ending. My overall opinion of the first volume, it's very good. It's pretty different from the mythology, especially with the whole revenge plot of Bruce Wayne. I thought that was a very weird take on the character, but it makes sense. This is a Batman that's really beginning in his prime. He really is not out to really serve the greater good until at the end of this volume, he decides to keep his mantle and continue to fight crime, which I think was fine. I do prefer the traditional origin where Batman just wants to fight crime because of that fact, instead of a murder revenge plot. But I think overall it works really well. I even like the whole Mayor Penguin thing. I actually think that fits with his character a lot, and I know in some continuities he becomes mayor as well. So that to me made sense. I also liked how Gordon slowly becomes the man that we usually see him in Batman mythology, slowly in time rising up to the challenge to fight the corruption in Gotham. I thought that was really good. The second volume kind of takes the turn for like the left, I guess you can call it. It revolves around a plot with the Riddler, who is slowly setting up things around the city, killing individuals who, after Cobblepot's empire collapsed when he was shot, his whole criminal enterprise was taken over by a few individuals in the city officials, corrupt officials, right? And the Riddler goes around killing them. And the Batman basically in his whole book is trying to stop the Riddler. It's like similar to like the Dark Knight and like how Batman was always responding to what Joker was doing. It's similar with the Riddler here, but you also have like this character called Harvey Dent and his sister, Jessica Kent, which, Harvey Dent, obviously famous character, 2Ks from the main mythology, have some background with the Waynes. Jessica was a former love of Bruce, and Harvey was kind of a bully. Jessica in this continuity becomes mayor, which I think was set up in the first volume somewhat. But here, she works out with Bruce. She finds out he's Batman as well, and they try to stop the corruption in the city and also try to stop the Riddler. Killer Croc also is a character introduced here, and this is where one of the things that's majorly different about this version. Killer Croc is actually a ally to Batman, instead of like Batman at first, like they don't get along obviously, but at first they start to understand each other, and eventually by the third volume he just folds up, like straight up joins the crew, which I actually really like that change. I don't know, it's really different from the core mythology of Batman, but I feel like in some versions, like Killer Croc, I could definitely see joining Batman in some versions of the Batman mythos. But the end of the book kind of ends on a very somber note. Really just Harvey dies, the Riddler gets caught, Batman stops him, and the kind of book ends on a somber note because Jessica Kent gets damaged as a result of being attacked by some muggers who killed Harvey. And the third volume is like a culmination of this. We find out that basically Jessica Kent, who has has her dead brother's persona inside of her, basically becomes this universe's version of Two-Face. And Batman has to stop her while also, working with Killer Croc and Alfred, finally getting a Batmobile, because like in most of the book, he was riding around in like a rich, kind of like fancy car. Here he's got a straight up sports car turned Batmobile, and finally a cave that he can actually have a base of operations at the end of the book. Also, there's this character that tricks Batman and Bruce into thinking that it's actually one of his dead ancestors, his great-grandfather on the Arkham side. And turns out it was, Clayface the entire time. A whole ruse by Jessica Dent, who is now Two-Face in this continuity. And then Batman, at the end of the book, also sets up, defeats Jessica, saves the city. Gordon also has become, the Gordon that we all know mainly from the main DC Comics. working with Batman consistently. And the book kind of sets up for a future where Batman has other people like Robin and Batgirl and Ragman team up with him. And of course has that infamous cliffhanger with the Joker, which, obviously was going to show this universe's version of the Joker. That was kind of a quick overview of the comics and their volumes. I probably skipped a few details, but I just wanted to give you my quick thoughts on them. I really liked this new reinvention of Batman. I really like the fact that this is a very early Batman in his career. He doesn't have it figured out, right? I also forgot to mention Catwoman is also introduced in the third volume, and she plays a role in it. I just forgot to mention that. But back to point. I really like the fact that this is a young Batman. He's still figuring out things. Slowly, as the books went along, slowly you can tell this is forming into the main Batman mythology that we all know and love, and I really like that. I think that this version of Batman was really good. I thought that all the challenge and the stories being told here with the Riddler, I think were really solid. I like the revenge plot in the first volume. I feel like that was an interesting and different origin for the character, but I really liked it. The third volume was really good too. I like the fact that Jessica becomes basically Two-Face. It's a radically different take on the character, because throughout the book, even though at the end of the second book it was kind of clear, but the third book they built it up as a giant mystery, making it seem like Harvey was really alive, and then they fool us by saying it's actually Jessica. And I thought that was a really good twist. I thought that wow, that's a really good and solid take on the character. I can totally see some shocks and gasps in the audience if this was ever made into a movie, and I thought it was really well done. I think that it was a cool idea. It was an interesting take on the character. There's some things too. Like I said, I like the fact that Killer Croc becomes a helping ally of the book. I like too that we get to know more about Bruce's lineage throughout the volumes, learning more about the Arkhams and the Waynes. Even though it's part of Jessica's plan and all that in the third volume, but I thought it was really good. Also, some of the new characters like Catwoman. She was fine in this. She gets introduced in the third volume, and I think she was introduced in the second one, and then she gets fully introduced in the third one in a pretty clever way. But I do think, her appearance could have been done a little bit better with her motivations. I still prefer the traditional Catwoman, where Batman kind of stops her robberies and they eventually kind of slowly form a relationship. While here, she just kind of immediately goes with him, which I think put me off a little bit, but I think it's fine. It's fine. I do think her design, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I do think it looks a bit too cheeky in my taste. But that's my opinion. Batman's suit, too, I'm also not the hugest fan of. I think it's fine. It overall works for the comic. But I do think it's, overall, not my favorite design of Batman. I prefer, Scott Snyder's take on Batman from the New 52, or Jim Lee's, or these other versions I've seen in comics. I prefer their versions, but this version's fine. It's more realistic. It actually shows Bruce's eyes in the suit, which in most comics they don't necessarily do that. They show his white eyes. So, like I said, this book is going for a much more realistic vibe. Overall, I thought this was a really solid and cool reconstruction of the character. I think it was handled pretty well. I thought it was really gripping. There's some few flaws. I think the crazy twist at the end of the third volume was kind of we saw it coming because the way the second volume ended. So I don't think that was really well done, but it was fine. It was well done, but it was a twist that we all knew was coming. And I do think it was a shame they weren't able to work in the bat signal into this version of Batman. He gives some of his people cell phones, which is fine, but I still prefer the traditional bat signal, right? I still think there could have been a way to work that into the origin of this version of Batman. And like I said, this Batman's going for a much more realistic take. The Batmobile is legit a sports car, but modified with some other things and attachments. It looks fine. I'm not the hugest fan of it, like the suit, but it looks fine. It's a decent version of it, right? It doesn't look hideous. What else? I thought the art was really well done. I think the dialogue was really well done. The way the panels were laid out, especially some scenes where action takes place, are really well done. All these books to me felt like movies in a way. That was one of the positive things about these Earth One books, when you read them, they feel like movies, right? Like you read them and you like feel like you've watched one movie. Especially this book, it feels really cinematic, with like mini panels with like minimal dialogue, but expressions and actions, and big, swash pages. I thought that was really good. And overall, I think the presentation and the art, the art was really well done throughout the series, and it really presented a really high quality take on Batman. It's not my favorite take on this Batman though. Like it's not my favorite version of him, but I think still it's a very solid and interesting take. I think obviously the biggest problem with this series is like I said, like many of the Earth One books, it took forever for all these volumes to come out, and I think that was ridiculous, right? I think these volumes, if they came out like every year or two and been much more consistent that way, I think that there'd be a much more bigger fan base for Batman Earth One. But the problem was that these books were extremely delayed. Like, I think the first to the second volume was 3 years, and then to the third one, it was like at least 6, right? And that's like insanely long to wait on a volume of a comic, right? I think that's way too long, especially in an industry that moves as fast as comic books does. Like they take as long as like movies do, and movies, they make sense, right? Movies have a lot of working parts. You got to get actors, you got to do CGI, you got to build sets, you got to edit, you got to get budgets, and you got to get people together. That takes time and money. Comic books, no offense, like obviously they take time to do. It takes time to draw, especially this beautiful artwork in this comic. But in my opinion, like I said, it shouldn't have taken this long to just get 3 volumes of this series. I think if this series was much more consistent and released like a volume a year or a volume every 2 years, which I think is more realistic, more fair of a timetable, I think the series would have been great and fantastic. I'm not going to put too much blame, though, on Batman Earth 1 and Jeff Johns, just because Jeff Johns is a very busy comic book writer. He was writing a lot of comics around this time, so I totally get some of the delays of why this book, took years to come out. So that's why, unlike some of the other Earth 1 books, like, I do get why some of the delays happened, but still, overall, pretty great reconstruction, and not my favorite version of Batman, but a very solid and interesting and different take on a traditional Batman, right? If you want to read this book and you know Batman, even if you don't know Batman, this is still a good read, but if you do know Batman and his mythology, I think you will get a real good kick out of reading these volumes, right? There's a lot of great and interesting twists and the characters and plot here that are very good and very solid. So yeah, overall, I would recommend Batman Earth 1 to people. They want to give it a try. And yeah, that's my quick video on Batman Earth 1. Peace. Thanks for watching.